Okay, hello everyone. Looks like we're live right now. Welcome to Digital Adoption in Canada, Trend, Barriers, and Opportunities for Growth. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're located. Feel free to add the message in the chat with your location, where you turning in. And if you're turning in from your couch in pajamas, honestly, no judgment. So a quick tech note to start. We're testing Zoom's automatic translation captioning feature. So please bear with us as we test this new tool. This webinar is presented in English with AI-supported translated captions. So to enable the translated caption, click Show Captions in your bottom toolbar, or you can find it under More with those three dots. Then click up the arrow in the top right corner of the Show Captions icon and toggle Translation on. Set your speaking language to your language of choice, and then set your caption language to your language of choice. The step-by-step instructions are also posted in the chat and available for you. I see some people messaging in the chat, turning in from Winnipeg, Toronto, Montreal, BC, Vancouver, BC, Halifax, wow, all over Canada. Happy to see all of you and really happy that we can cover the whole Canada in this webinar. Okay, before we begin, so my name is Marina Ivus. I'm located in Ottawa, Ontario, and I'm Manager of Economics at Information and Communication Technology Council, or ICTC, and I will be MC for today. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the land on which we live and work. We're living on Turtle Island, the land colonized as North America. And this land is shared by thousands of First Nation tribes who have been here for immemorial. We'd also like to acknowledge the Métis and Inuit peoples as well, and ask that we move forward together, acknowledging the truths of the past and repairing those relationships in order to walk side by side into the future. Today, gathered in this digital space, we invite you to take a moment to reflect on the traditional, ancestral, unceded Inuit, Métis, and the First Nation territories on which you are settled. And a few logistics. This webinar is live and it's meant to be interactive, so I encourage you to please use your chat to ask questions. Please feel free to drop your question in the chat at any point. When the webinar ends, we will also have a short anonymous survey for you to submit additional questions and feedback. And this section is being recorded, and we will share the presentation with attendees in follow-up. And now I'm delighted to introduce the first speaker, ICTC's Chief Research and Communication Officer, Ann Patterson. Over to you, Ann.
Thank you, Marina. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are joining us from today. And thank you for joining us. We're so happy to have you all here and welcome you to the launch of ICTC's latest Digital Economy Pulse, which is focused on digital adoption in Canada. So today's session marks the beginning of a new quarterly webinar series where we will be sharing timely labor market intelligence and insights on Canada's digital economy. So we look forward to more of these sessions over the next few years as well. Before we jump into the findings and our presentation today, I do want to briefly introduce who we are. As Marina said, we're the Information and Communications Technology Council, or ICTC, and we are a national not-for-profit center of expertise focused on strengthening Canada's digital advantage in the global economy. We've been around for over 30 years, and we work at the intersection of research, policy, and programming, producing forward-looking labor market intelligence, advising governments and industry, and delivering capacity-building initiatives that help individuals and businesses succeed in a rapidly changing economy. At the core of our work is the belief that technology, talent, and innovation are central to Canada's economic future. So whether it's supporting digital adoption or building in-demand skills or informing policy, our goal is really to ensure that Canada remains competitive, inclusive, and resilient in the digital age. Which brings us to today's webinar. Our new Digital Economy Pulse series is designed to provide regular data-driven snapshots of key trends that are shaping Canada's digital economy. So in this first edition, we're going to focus on digital adoption, an area that's increasingly critical to productivity and competitiveness. Now, our research shows a mixed picture, and we're going to get into that in just a few minutes. Canada has very strong assets, so particularly in research and talent, but we do continue to face challenges, including slow productivity growth and uneven adoption of advanced technologies, especially among small and medium-sized businesses. At the same time, there are very clear opportunities to accelerate adoption across sectors and to strengthen Canada's economic performance. So I'm very much looking forward to today's presentation from my colleagues who are going to walk you through the key findings from our report, highlighting where Canada stands today, the barriers we need to address, and the opportunities ahead. Since this is our first webinar in this series, which we're going to be hosting quarterly, we also really want to learn from you. So as Marina said, we would really value your input on what kinds of insights, data, or topics would be most helpful for future sessions. And so at the end of today's webinar, you'll see a short survey, and we would really appreciate you taking a few moments to share your feedback so that we can shape this series in a way that best supports your need and your interest areas. So thank you so much for joining us. With that, I will turn it back to Marina to take us forward.
Thank you so much, Anne. To continue the presentation and to cover the research segment of this discussion, I will now introduce Chris Lindstrom, who is an economist and research analyst at ICTC and a co-author of ICTC report, Quarter Digital Economy Pulse, Digital Adoption in Canada. Take it away, Chris.
Sure, thanks, Marina. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. As Marina mentioned, my name is Chris Lindstrom, and I'm an economist and a research analyst here at ICTC, and also one of the co-authors on the report that we're discussing today, along with Marina and a handful of other folks who aren't on the call today. I'll be walking you through some of the key findings from our latest Digital Economy Pulse, specifically on digital adoption within Canada. Great. So as Anne mentioned, this report is part of a quarterly digital economy pulse series in which we examine trends and challenges shaping Canada's digital economy. This edition focuses specifically on digital adoption by Canadian businesses, particularly with regard to the use of advanced technologies such as artificial intelligence, cloud computing, Internet of Things, and data analytics. The analysis itself combines a kind of various data sets. So first we use data sources, secondary data sources from places like StatsCan and OECD. We also collected primary data through a survey that we distributed to industry stakeholders. And then this was supplemented with qualitative insights from industry interviews. So what this allowed us to do was take a broader look at sort of the quantitative trends and where things are going, and then understand those trends, the why and how, through real-world business perspectives. So broadly speaking, the report looks at three core things. So first, we look at Canada's performance relative to peer countries as it comes to productivity and digital adoption. We look at the key barriers businesses face in adopting these technologies. And then we see how adoption trends vary a bit across strategic sectors and particularly by firm size, as Anne alluded to. The overall goal here is to better understand what exactly is holding back adoption across these Canadian firms and where there might be opportunities to strengthen productivity, innovation, and competitiveness. So to begin with a quick overview of what exactly digital adoption is and why it matters, the digital economy is a critical lever for productivity, innovation, and global competitiveness in Canada. In the report, we define digital adoption as the integration of technology into business operations and processes. So you'll note that this includes both relatively basic tools, or that have been used throughout time. So things like accounting or enterprise software. But it also encompasses more advanced technologies such as AI, cloud computing, and IoT systems. So when we talk about adoption here, we're not talking about just the access to technology, but rather how deeply it's embedded into everyday business activities and workflows. A growing body of research shows that digitalization is closely linked to improvements in productivity and economic performance, which is why this is such a central topic that we endeavor to research. You can think of a digital adoption as the mechanism through which innovation actually translates into economic outcomes. So, without adoption, even strong research, talent, and infrastructure don't necessarily lead to productivity gains at the firm level, which would compound at the macro, regional, and national level too, which our study will illustrate shortly. So to dig into this a little bit deeper, we situate it within Canada's broader productivity context. So on the diagram on the left here, you'll see three lines. The top dark blue line there is unit labor cost. So in simple terms, this is how much it costs in wages to produce 1 unit of output. The second line in red is real gross domestic product. So the total value of all goods and services produced, adjusted for inflation. The third and final line in purple at the very bottom is labor productivity, and that's what we're interested in here. And that's how much output is produced per hour worked. An important thing to note about this diagram is that this isn't levels or count. This is rate of change over the years. So over the past decade, labor productivity growth in Canada has been just 0.9%, indicated by that purple line at the bottom. And furthermore, more recently, productivity has declined in 17 of the last 20 quarters, meaning that less output is being produced per hour worked. So you'll see that from 2020 through to 2024, it has steadily decreased over time. At the macro scale, Canada is now the second least productive country in the G7, and real wages remain below pre-pandemic levels. The chart also shows a pretty clear divergence over time. So labor productivity at the bottom has remained relatively flat, whereas unit labor costs at the top have increased significantly over the years. What this means in practice then is that businesses are effectively paying more for labor without seeing corresponding gains in output. This trend is particularly meaningful because productivity is a core driver of economic growth. Logically, when productivity remains weak, it limits output per worker. This constrains the value that firm can generate from labor and their outputs. And ultimately, this translates to slower wage growth over time, which seeps into day-to-day livelihoods of individuals. A key driver behind this is weak capital investment, and this is particularly regarding tools, equipment, and other productivity-enhancing technologies. And this is where digital adoption, the point of today's conversation, becomes especially critical, as it is one of the main ways that firms can improve efficiency and output, which has spillover effects to the workers themselves. At the same time, Canada performs relatively well on research and innovation inputs. So the chart here compares R&D investment across countries, and this is broken down by government spending, higher education, and business in that order for those charts. This compares, Canada as relative to OECD averages as well as the US. What stands out here in particular is that Canada has quite a relatively strong higher education R&D investment there in the dark blue the red in the middle there, but weaker business investment at the very bottom. We've also seen increases in patent production over time. However, this is not necessarily translated into productivity gains. In fact, WIPO estimates suggest that Canada is not capturing roughly 50% of its technological potential when you compare research output, so patenting, for example, to the actual commercialization of these solutions. What this reflects is challenges around the process of that initial commercialization stage, as well as scaling this intellectual property, and then retaining that IP within Canada, as opposed to, say, across the border to the larger patenting market in the United States. The ultimate challenge here then is converting research into economic value that can be realized domestically. So at the bottom line, the high level kind of overview is that Canada is relatively strong at generating ideas and research, but weaker at scaling those ideas into competitive firms and industries that drive that sustained economic value. This pattern is also reflected in digital adoption trends. So on one hand, Canada performs well on foundational indicators, scoring particularly well relative to other OECD countries when it comes to things like public digital literacy and education. Specifically, 96.9% of Canadian adults use the internet in the past 3 months, and this is compared to an OECD average of 92.6%. Canada also has a high proportion of post-secondary graduates with STEM degrees compared to other OECD countries. And now these two components are very crucial, and they're foundational elements of establishing an economy that's able to adopt technologies, but they aren't sufficient. Indeed, when we look at business adoption of advanced technologies, Canada lags peer countries. Specifically, Canada sits below the OECD average for cloud computing and IoT adoption. It also has the lowest proportion of businesses adopting big data analytics, as well as lower levels of AI adoption. And this is despite being a leader in AI research and producing one of the world's highest per capita volumes of AI research publications. So this highlights a sort of broader structural issue where Canada's strengths and talents and research are not fully mobilized into firm level adoption and economic performance, particularly in non-digital sectors. Our research shows that rates of digital adoption are also not made equal across firms. So this gap is particularly evident when we take a look at firm size. So in Canada, small and medium-sized enterprises, defined as having fewer than 500 employees, make up approximately 86.7% of all employer businesses. So that's the majority. Yet they're significantly less likely to adopt advanced technologies, specifically the ones that we talked about today, including IoT, AI, big data analytics, and cloud computing. In contrast, large businesses and ICT companies are much more likely to incorporate these technologies into their day-to-day workflows and operations. And yet, given the dominance of SMEs in the Canadian economy, this gap has significant implications for productivity and output at the macro level. So these trends then lead to the question of, why is this the case, and what barriers are exactly impeding this further adoption? Through our interview insights and secondary research, we've identified a handful of core barriers here. So one is the lack of awareness of when and how technologies can be adopted. So even if firms are aware that these technologies exist, the practical next steps of actually incorporating that into their day-to-day workflows is still a bit unclear. A second barrier is high initial investment costs, specifically to acquire, adopt, or integrate these technologies. The third is an unclear returns on investment. So if we were to incorporate these technologies, what are the short or long-term returns to that investment? And the fourth, an insufficient access to skilled workers that can implement or operate these technologies. There are a couple of additional considerations here too. So firms stated that they face concerns around privacy, risk, compliance, and intellectual property. And some employers have cited issues with delays related to fine-tuning or customizing these more off-the-shelf solutions to their firm's needs. So as we speak to industry stakeholders and experts, they've highlighted that in practice, these barriers can be and often are interconnected. For example, uncertainty around return on investment, along with high initial costs, can make firms a bit more cautious or risk averse when it comes to taking the steps are required to adopt these new technologies. And that might also limit their ability to hire the skilled workers needed to implement these technologies effectively. Likewise, digital adoption rates, they don't only vary by firm size, but the rates, the drivers, and barriers of digital adoption can vary by sector as well. So specifically, we explored 6 priority sectors that have been identified as being innovative and core drivers of Canada's digital economy moving forwards to understand what this looks like. What we see across these sectors is that while adoption is progressing, the pace and the nature of adoption differ depending on sector-specific conditions. So this can include things like differences in infrastructure, regulatory environments, as well as how uniquely certain sectors are subject to specific types of macroeconomic shocks. So in advanced manufacturing, about 74.9% of firms reported adopting at least one advanced technology in 2022, and this was up from 69.9% in 2014. These include technologies like robotics, additive manufacturing, as well as data analytics. And while adoption has increased over this time period, there is still a need for continued investments in both technology and skilled workers in order to fully realize those productivity gains. In the agri-food sector, the adoption rate of advanced technologies reached 61.1% in 2022. The sector has also attracted significant investment, including 5.4 billion US dollars in 2023, placing it ninth globally in terms of agri-food technology investment. Barriers still remain, however, and is unique to the agri-food technology sector. A barrier here is limited broadband access, especially as it pertains to rural and remote areas. Skill gaps have also been cited as an issue, as well as a degree of a risk aversion amongst farmers and producers. So in this case, adoption is influenced not just by cost, but also by infrastructure constraints and then the need for perhaps more tailored support and knowledge transfer between these stakeholders. In health and life sciences, digital adoption has accelerated rapidly, particularly during the pandemic, as we're aware. For example, 94% of physicians were using virtual care by 2021, and 62% of enterprises reported adopting advanced technologies in 2022. So here, challenges are a little more oriented towards regulatory complexity, especially as it comes to interprovincial regulations. Workforce capacity constraints and the needs for digital skills development are also core barriers in this field. In clean technology, about 33.4% of businesses reported adopting clean technologies in 2022. Growth in this sector is increasingly driven by digital innovation and the emergence of green skills. Again, the most cited constraints include access to capital and the availability of skilled workers. So as a result, the adoption in this sector is closely tied to both financial capacity and the availability of specialized talent, particularly as digital and environmental objectives become increasingly integrated. And so the need for people with those both competencies grows over time. In the natural resources sector, around 55.3% of firms reported adopting advanced technologies. And this is especially concentrated in companies related to mining, quarrying, and oil and gas extraction. In 2022, 87% of Canada's total energy production originated from emission-intensive industries. And with the ongoing move toward cleaner and more efficient production, the sector is facing a so-called twin transition. And so what we mean by that is that the process of advancing digitalization and sustainability are ongoing and simultaneous. And this must be done in a way that balances both economic growth goals while hitting those emission reduction targets. Digital industries, unsurprisingly, tend to have higher adoption rates. So digital industries here are defined as technology companies and businesses that hire technology talent. For example, according to an employer survey that we distributed, 55.9% of firms engaged in digital industries plan to adopt AI, compared to 17.6% in the broader economy, as per the Business Conditions Survey by Statistics Canada. Additionally, in Statistics Canada's 2022 survey of advanced technology, about three-quarters of firms in professional, scientific, and technical services have adopted advanced technologies. So clearly, there is a gap here between the digital sectors and the rest of the economy. And this reinforces the idea that sectors that are already digitally intensive tend to adopt new technologies more quickly, which can further widen the gap between a traditional and perhaps the more innovative industries. So looking ahead, then, in conclusion, Canada has demonstrated economic resilience, but significant challenges still exist as it pertains to low productivity, business investment, and challenges in commercialization and IP retention within Canada. To date, factors such as immigration and digital adoption have been significant drivers of economic growth, but competitiveness and sustained competitiveness over time remains quite constrained. So what this report ultimately highlights is that the issue is not necessarily a lack of capability, but rather a gap between adoption and implementation. So moving forwards, what we show is that integrating technologies such as AI, IoT, big data analytics, and cloud computing will be very important for improving um, macroeconomic output, even down to the firm level. So productivity, efficiency, especially amongst SMEs. What this means in practice then, it requires kind of continued strategic focus on several factors. So one is innovation. By cultivating local environments that facilitate and encourage businesses to integrate emerging technologies. Another is increased access and means to invest in capital. And importantly, a workforce development, such as through strengthening digital talent pipelines and work placements to support adoption and a future-ready workforce. So with that said, I'll pass things back to Marina. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Chris. This research is so valuable. And as a reminder, this research is available on our website. So if Karlik, if you can please click to the next slide, to the QR code. Thank you. So if you scan the QR code on the screen now, it will take you to the full report. Encourage you to check it out. We also have lots of other research and policy briefs to check out on our website, including reporting on AI, semiconductors, and employment trends. Okay, and as a reminder, if you have any questions for Chris, please add them to the chat. Thank you. Okay, and now I get to introduce our next speaker, who will discuss how these findings are playing out across the country, as well as opportunities and recommendations for businesses to stay on pace. Please welcome Iman Yahuyai, ICTC Senior Director of Industry and Ecosystem Engagement. Over to you, Iman.
Thank you so much, Marina. Thank you, Chris, as well. Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for this first series of the quarterly webinars. I would like to start and trying to keep us on time as well. So what my colleague Chris went through and basically talked about and walked us through was a bit of a macro picture of how Canada is performing on digital adoption, broadly speaking, across a variety of digital technologies, where productivity gaps exist, why advanced technology adoption matters. What I'm hoping to do in my segment, as my colleague Marina mentioned, is to bring it a little bit down, try to basically look at the labor market level information, the nature of jobs, the skills that are out there in the market, the demand that we see across Canada and across sectors, particularly from different types of businesses and how they are reacting to these novel technologies. I would like to focus in my segment on AI simply because this is the talk of the day and we see emergence, a very strong and forceful emergence of AI in different shapes and forms in our population of projects that we support at ICTC through our Work Integrated Learning program. That's where we have done a lot of research at ICTC as well. And why looking at labor market level? Because when businesses start adopting technologies like AI, often the first place that we start to see impact is in how work itself changes, what employers hire for, what sort of skills go hot and on demand, and which ones actually go on decline, and then try to draw up some recommendations and some forecasting based upon that. So here, what I'm basically trying to show is to first understand how this played out in practice. It is helpful to look at which jobs are most exposed to AI today. This is not just tech jobs, it's across the board. I think as the common sense would dictate, the more human involved a job and the less technology and automation exposed, it's the less likely to be impacted severely by AI, at least in the near term. And on the other side of the shop, when you're looking at the jobs that are more prone to automation and there is less active physical human intervention involved, majority of them tech jobs, that's where AI exposures become more disruptive, or at least that's what the presumption is. Having said that, we do see already some prime exceptions to this rule. Software development, for example, as folks look into AI and emergence of AI, is one of those areas where we have expected a major disruption, potentially even a job market, a labor market collapse across that domain. But the labor market data and sort of job postings that we have studied most recently from 2023 all the way to the end of 2025 shows the exact opposite. In fact, we see a surge in demand for software developers and software engineers. So a further study actually shows that what's happening in the tech sector, what's happening in many of these jobs is not a labor market collapse, but rather a very strong task reconfiguration, essentially, as I basically mentioned in my opening, that AI is not basically replacing these roles, but rather significantly changing the content of these roles and the sort of activities and tasks that are expected of the individuals operating in these roles. Software development is a good example, for example, where you have had your typical coding expertise and skills. Now we're seeing a shift towards basically spending less time on routine execution and coding, but rather more time on problem framing, architecting the decisions, adding business context and business translation and judgment to it, essentially. So the real shift is not fewer jobs in this case, it's just higher expectations around applied capabilities for operators in the job. Now, this becomes a little bit more clear when we look away from just the job titles and occupations in that last slide and look into skills, and not just in tech sector, but across all industries. And when you're looking at that, we observe that demand for AI-related skills is growing dramatically across industries. Again, I would like to stress that this is not just in technology framing, but it's rather across different sectors, including even real estate, for example, and basic sales jobs. You're seeing explosive growth in areas like machine learning and generative AI and large language models. Obviously, the level of expectation for understanding and deep operability of the job seekers in these technologies is different. I mean, most of these roles expect basic familiarity with these tools and how to use them. Generative AI, for example, the emergence of OpenAI in the jobs postings and the job skills speaks to that. But the fact that it's across the board and it's explosive means something. It means that AI is moving slowly but surely into day-to-day operations, product development, customer experience, and internal workflows across different sectors. So the question is no longer whether organizations will use AI, it's how quickly they can build the capability to use it effectively. So that's one context. Secondary context, which is equally important and has a defining impact on how to prepare for this shift, is what's especially changing in the core business skills. The fact that it's not just AI skills that are on a growing surge and a growing path. Business skills are rising right alongside these core technical skills, and in some cases even faster than AI. So companies are increasingly looking for a bit of a layering of skills and expertise. They would like folks who have that base understanding of AI and different technologies depending on the needs of that particular job or particular sector. But at the same time, they would like to have individuals with deep understanding of the core business practices, risk management, process optimization, change management within the context of the particular sector, ability to comment on business strategy, for example, product selection. So all of that is also becoming very important. And what's interesting for us, and it's corroborated with the demand that we see in our internship, for example, job posting, is that the business skills are actually growing much faster than the core AI skills. There was a time that we saw some sudden spikes and surges in the AI skills in the job postings. That time is fair to say is behind us, and now we're seeing an emergence of roles where that baseline AI skills is a given, but what's on the heavy rise is that layering, the additional basically skills that the companies are looking for on top of the core AI skills, which basically translates into how AI is shifting the value, the expectations, and the requirements for jobs up the task stack. And what would that mean if we basically could look at the spectrum of roles? On the left side, you're looking at automated tasks, those that are much more prone to automation, to basically substantial change and displacement by AI. Those are often tasks that are of low business context. They have high repeatability. They don't really need a lot of those core business skills for the operators to do them. An entry level basically operator could basically do all of those. And often those are the ones that are at risk of replacement with AI, the negative AI exposure, if you will. And as I mentioned, they just happen to sit in the kind of bucket where you will have your typical entry level operators with less than 3 years of experience. As you move up, though, there comes the augmented tasks where there has to be human in the loop, term that is being used in the industry. These are tasks with some moderate business context, and there is a shared human and AI control. There are validations, design validations for engineers, for example. And these are the jobs that we do see do require some additional business context, often more than 3 years of experience. 3 to 5 years is your sweet spot. And we actually see them on heavy rise because of this AI addition. And of course, at the very top of it is the human-led tasks, oftentimes require high business context, accountability at a human level, and very strong judgment. These are the leadership roles that are augmented with AI now. Often more than 5 years of experience is required. So there has to be some deep level of knowledge of that particular sector. And this is where we're seeing almost an explosion of demand essentially for these kind of talent. So that's how AI has come to shift things around. And as I indicated, the inevitable meaning of this is what you see here, essentially a sharp decline and demands for those entry-level roles, and on the other side, a sharp increase in demand for the more experienced operators, essentially. So again, all of it is in the context of AI, with AI exposure. On the one hand, AI is basically diminishing or displacing some of the entry-level roles unless they change and pivot and adapt the operators in those fields. And on the other side is boosting demand for more advanced roles. And quite naturally, the impact of this is what we see in the job markets, in the unemployment data among youth who will make up bulk of that under 3 year of experience operators, the new entrants to the market. Unemployment data, I don't need to repeat them, shows that consistently they're sitting at twice the national unemployment average in that bucket of basically workers. Of course, there are individual impact on these individuals, including the labor market scarring, broad impact on the country, which my colleague Chris captured in his portion. But of course, there are immediate impact on the employers. There is a shrinking future talent pipeline. The mid-career individuals, folks with those elevated experience, are either on the path to retirement. They're just hard to come by. So your talent pool naturally shrinks. Capacity constraints emerge, wage pressure starts to push itself because now businesses have to compete. And that's where essentially you'll see reduced ability to adopt and operationalize emerging technologies like AI. It's basically applicable across deep technology segment. We see similar trends. Now, I would like to end rather quickly by a couple of recommendations as well as to how we could potentially counter this. Of course, one way and one of the activities that ICTC has been actively involved in and try to promote is how can we reimagine workforce entry points for those early career talent? Because Canada obviously is known, as also articulated by my colleague Chris, from its higher education institutions, world-class universities, colleges producing early stage talent. So on that front, we are very strong. So perhaps we should basically take on different models of training these talents and get them ready for entering into the job market by following a skills first model as opposed to a degree first, or just continuing the typical and traditional pathways of academic training. We have to constantly look for ways to expose these individuals with that baseline knowledge of AI, train them and get them up to speed on that level, but also put them into real world business context so they can apply those core skills. And some of those are skills that could come handy when you're thinking about a particular AI training and AI skills blueprint framework. Well, there's obviously the core technical competencies that could be built rather quickly and in isolation from a real business world experience. It could be a class training and asynchronous training, easy to do. A lot of vendors are doing that. Then comes the added business and contextual context and skills that will be best picked up during the course of some hands-on learning experiences. And then, of course, there are complementary human skills, meta skills or soft skills that needs to be built throughout the course of these engagements, essentially. And I would like to end by perhaps highlighting two potential pathways that my colleague Chris also mentioned in his portion. One would be the work integrated learning or WIL opportunities that ICTC is one of the many providers of those opportunities in Canada, but one perhaps that is specifically focused on digital technology sector. This is where you basically give those early entrants to the market, particularly students in this case, an opportunity to perform some of these tasks and put some of their skills and experience into practice and handling a real world business problem under the supervision of an industry partner. So that's one solution to basically change your training in a way that is more responsive to the disruptions caused by AI. And of course, there is a variety of micro-credentials regimes of training that basically are need-based and are immediately verifiable for the industry that they can pick up from those graduates immediately. That's my portion, I believe. Back to you, Marina.
Thank you so much, Iman. Very timely. Okay, everyone, this is your time. So if you have any questions to Iman, for Iman or Chris, please add them to the chat, and I'll be pulling them as they come in. Okay, while you're typing, I want to ask one question that was submitted through the registration form. What does the research say about the impact of AI on productivity? Chris, I think I'll direct it to you.
Sure, yeah, sounds good. Well, Iman, thank you for the industry insights there. I think I'll kind of go off of that as well. So as Iman highlighted, there's a fair bit of variability in terms of the way that AI intersects with day-to-day operations, whether that be by role, tasks, area of knowledge, sector, and things like that. So you touched upon the implications for kind of the day-to-day. From kind of a higher level macro lens, empirical findings on AI's productivity effects so far remain fairly mixed. Some studies have found no significant relationship between AI adoption and productivity, especially ones that, especially studies preceding the development of generative AI. So this suggests that outcomes depend heavily on how technologies are implemented and integrated into workflows. And as Iman mentioned, ultimately the ability to build capability to use it effectively in a way that's complementary to your human capital to date. At the same time, our report points to a study done by OECD. So the OECD estimates that the total factor productivity growth, which is essentially the growth and productivity of the economy as a whole, in Canada could increase by anywhere between 0.25% to 0.6% annually, depending on the level and effectiveness of AI adoption. So that underscores that, as with any technology, its effectiveness depends on how it's deployed, integrated, and scaled within firms, and if they have folks to effectively utilize it. I think, a new technology just in and of itself doesn't guarantee productivity returns, but it needs to be used effectively.
Okay, thank you so much, Chris. Okay, there is one actually question that I would like to ask Iman. And you mentioned that Canada has a highly educated workforce with a high share of STEM graduate. So why is the lack of skilled labor still cited as a core barrier for digital adoption?
Absolutely. That's a great question, obviously. If I want to summarize it, it's not about the volume or quality of the talent. Both are true, actually. We do produce high volume of really high quality graduates here, STEM, but obviously across the board, across disciplines, that's the case through our world-class universities. The problem is not the volume or quality. The problem is the mismatch between the core skills of these talent as graduation and the needs of industry. That's not a rather new issue. It's been known for years, that mismatch and the gap that exists between the graduates and what the industry needs, leading to the industry needing to retrain them essentially. There has been some interventions over the years, like co-ops, internship opportunities. Those are all things that have been long in place trying to address and close that gap. But what has changed, particularly with the emergence of AI, is just the pace of movement on the industry side. That often no amount of response time from the academic institutions, no amount of curriculum shifts or curriculum changes to adapt to the industrial needs is not enough. Almost every 2 months, every 3 months, AI comes to change basically the lay of the land yet again. That has created that issue and the gap that keeps increasing. And that's why we are suggesting in our studies, in our interventions, that perhaps you need to adopt a stronger regime of work integrated learning combined with some fast-paced training in the form of, say, micro-credentials, just to be able to adapt and respond. It's not a university or a post-secondary issue. They just simply cannot operate at that pace to respond. And it's not an industry problem alone. It has to be basically bridged together using those opportunities. Hope I answered the question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Iman. And we have a question here from Farzin. Amazing session and appreciate the insights. HR consultant here from the GTA and would love to better understand how AI adoption influences people leader roles versus individual contributor roles differently, if anything stood out in the research. Iman, I probably would address this question to you if you have any insights to share.
Happy to take a first step, but I would also like to hear the research side of things if Chris has anything additional to add. But as I tried to capture in my portion, often those individual contributors, not all the time, obviously, but often they are either on the earlier stages of their career, under 3 years, 3 to 5 years, where they're basically practicing and operating as a sole contributor, not in charge of teams. Now, again, based on the scale and the nature of the role, whether it's got lower business content essentially and business judgment that are required, and it's just merely working on a product development, for example, without any context from the market, from strategic directions of the whole company. That's where you see AI impacting their day-to-day and their activities differently, oftentimes disrupting basically their work. As they move up as an individual contributor and just start to gain a little bit more of business context and market context, then what we see essentially is that AI can become a very strong force to push them up in their career essentially, and they become suddenly very hot commodity. When it comes to the leaders and the leadership roles, that's where you see a strong business context and business strategy that, if combined with AI, could do wonders. And that's where we see most of the business decision makers are trying to adopt AI. The way that they are looking at AI is now to decide their product direction, their corporate direction, their market strategies, which verticals to pick, which verticals to basically double down on which sides of the business to perhaps look into retirement or winding down. So the nature of activities are entirely different. On the one hand, with the people managers and with folks on the leadership roles, I would argue that their addition to AI becomes far more consequential, essentially. AI just becomes merely yet another tool in their day-to-day that enhances their capabilities, as opposed to just a replacement to their activities. I'm not sure if it was a good answer to the question.
Thank you so much, Iman. Anything to add, Chris?
No, I felt that was very comprehensive. We didn't dive into the weeds for that all too much in this current report. Thanks so much.
Thank you. We have a question that came through the question and answer chat. Are there any real funding programs to de-risk AI adoption by SMEs? And by real means open, available, and well-funded. I think I can answer this question. We are at ICTC, we are working on numerous programs for workforce development, etc. And please, I suggest to sign up for our newsletters and check those out and see what's coming. So Carly, if you can drop a link in the chat how to sign up for our newsletter, I would highly encourage to follow the newsletters. Okay. I see questions coming in the chat. I'm not sure how much time we have left. It's 2:21 Ottawa time. There is one question from Julie Baranova. Is there credible research showing that AI tools increase or decrease employee burnout? If yes, what mechanisms drive this? Cognitive load, expectation workload, and what organizational practices actually prevent AI-related burnout at scale? Any volunteers to answer this? Iman or Chris?
I would have to defer to Chris on that one, the research side, because my inclinations will be anecdotal from my engagements with industry partners. Chris, any insights?
Sure. I mean, we don't currently have, I guess, data about this specific metric. That's an interesting research question, possibly something for us to explore a little bit deeper into moving forwards. But if anyone in the chat has any research that they've witnessed about this topic, feel free to share. And if not, we'll probably have to save that for our future endeavors.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Chris, Iman, and Anne, and to all of you for joining us today and bringing such good questions. We really appreciate your time, and we're at time right now. So unfortunately, if we didn't get to your questions live, we will reach out to you in a follow-up, and we'll be sharing the presentation with you as well. There's a few questions asking that. So when the webinar ends, as a reminder, you'll be served out a short exit survey to submit additional feedback. And we want to hear from you. So your feedback is really valuable to us, and it will be used to improve future sessions. The survey is anonymous, and if you submit any additional questions and would like to receive the response, please write your email in the text field so we can get back to you. Have a great rest of the week, and thank you for being here, and be safe.